Joseph was not hated because he was weak. He was hated because he was favored. In a family that was built on rivalry, on brothers competing for a father's love, Joseph stood apart. He wasn't louder than his brothers. He wasn't stronger. He was just chosen. And that simple fact, the act of being chosen, has a strange way of creating enemies where there should be family. It's a quiet truth that the world often resents not what is weak, but what is different, what is set apart. Joseph dreamed often, and his dreams were not small. They were visions of power, of significance. He saw sheaves of wheat, his own standing tall while the others bowed down. He saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars all bowing before him. These were not just dreams. They were prophecies spoken in the language of sleep. He shared these dreams with his brothers, not out of malice, not to provoke them, but with the naive honesty of someone who hasn't yet learned the weight of his own words. He didn't understand that some truths are best kept in silence, that some visions should be held close to the heart. As he spoke, their smiles vanished. The thin patience they had for their favored younger brother finally snapped. To them, his dreams sounded like arrogance. The favor their father showed him now felt like unbearable pride. And so, his dreams, which were simply visions to him, sounded like insults to ears already ringing with anger and jealousy. They heard a declaration of superiority, not a glimpse into a future he didn't even understand himself. The seeds of resentment, long planted, began to sprout into something much darker. One day, far from the safety of their father's gaze, the brothers made a decision. It was a choice that would echo through the rest of their lives, a moment they could never take back. They saw Joseph approaching from a distance, wearing the coat of many colors, the very symbol of his special status. It was a beautiful garment, but to them, it was a flag of everything they resented. They surrounded him. They stripped him of that coat, tearing away the physical mark of his favor. They didn't strike him. They didn't kill him, though the thought had crossed their minds. They did something quieter, something that would haunt them in a different way. They threw him into an empty pit and walked away. The pit was deep. The silence was deeper. In that darkness, Joseph called out for his brothers. He pleaded. He begged. But no one answered. The only reply was the echo of his own voice in the cold, empty space. He was utterly alone, betrayed by the very people who should have protected him. Above, the world went on. The sun was still shining. His brothers sat down to eat, the scent of their meal drifting down into the darkness where their brother sat, abandoned. Then, a caravan appeared on the horizon. A line of traders, strangers on their way to Egypt. Where there should have been a pang of guilt, a moment of mercy, the brothers saw an opportunity. It was a chance to be rid of their problem for good, without having to carry the direct weight of his death. They pulled Joseph from the pit. They sold him, not for great wealth, but for 20 pieces of silver. They sold him for relief. Coins changed hands, and a brother became property. Joseph didn't fight back. He didn't scream anymore. A painful lesson was beginning to form in his young mind, that innocence is not a shield. Being good, being chosen, being blameless, none of it protects you from the cruelty of others. He was now a slave, bound for a foreign land, his future erased, his family gone. The boy who dreamed of stars bowing to him was now chained and anonymous, just another piece of cargo on its way to Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph's life began again, this time at the very bottom. He was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, but the favor that had once brought him ruin now served him well. He worked hard. He didn't complain. He learned the art of restraint, the discipline of patience. Everything he touched seemed to prosper, and soon he was trusted with his master's entire household. For a moment, it seemed like things were turning around. But his story was not a straight line to success. It was a series of falls and rises. And then, he fell again. Falsely accused by his master's wife, he was thrown into prison. He went from trusted servant back to nothing, forgotten in a royal dungeon. The pit had returned. Only this time it had stone walls and iron bars. He was innocent, yet he was punished. He had done everything right, and everything had gone wrong. Again, in that prison, Joseph learned what it meant to wait without an explanation, to endure suffering without knowing why, without seeing an end in sight. Years passed in that prison. There were no grand dreams of escape this time. No divine voice came to explain the pain or promise a swift rescue. There was only time, day after day of silence and quiet endurance. The favor that had once made him feel proud and special now taught him a different lesson: humility. He learned to serve, to listen, to wait. The arrogant boy who boasted of his dreams was being forged into a man of quiet strength. A man who understood that true power wasn't about being above others, but about enduring when you are at the very bottom. When Joseph was finally remembered, it wasn't because he banged on the prison doors demanding justice. It was because he was ready. Pharaoh had dreams that no one could interpret, and a fellow prisoner, now restored to his position, remembered the young Hebrew who could see meaning in visions. Joseph was brought before the most powerful man in the world. He stood there, not as a proud youth, but as a humble servant. He interpreted the dreams again, but this time with wisdom, not arrogance. He didn't claim the power for himself. He gave the credit to God. And then he rose, not suddenly, but steadily, from prisoner to prime minister, from forgotten inmate to the second most powerful ruler in Egypt. He was given charge of the entire land, tasked with saving a nation from a coming famine. The boy who was thrown into a pit was now sitting on a throne. The journey had been long and brutal, but it had prepared him for this exact moment. Years later, the famine he had foreseen gripped the land, reaching all the way back to his own family. Desperate for food, his brothers journeyed to Egypt. They came before the powerful ruler, bowing low, completely unaware of who he was. Joseph recognized them instantly. The faces that had sneered at him, the hands that had thrown him into the pit. They were all here, helpless and at his mercy. He held their lives in his hands. Power, a kind he had never imagined, rested with him. Revenge was his for the taking. He could have imprisoned them, starved them, destroyed them. But Joseph chose something harder. He chose restraint. He tested them. He watched them. He saw that they had changed. He saw their guilt, their remorse for what they had done so many years ago. And when the time was right, he revealed himself. He looked at the men who had sold him into slavery, the men who had wished him dead, and he did not destroy them. Instead, he wept. He forgave them. He had learned something in the pit and the prison that they had never understood. He learned that survival changes a person, and that forgiveness, true forgiveness, costs far more than hatred ever could. It requires a strength that revenge can never comprehend. Sometimes the story isn't about the dream. It's about who you become when the dream is delayed.